Hello friends, my name's Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we are covering a classic American muscle cars. Now we haven't really had too many classic cars go around the Top Gear track this season, and that's why we're throwing some of the older cars around today. The other thing is, I've always been kind of curious about classic American muscle cars around the Top Gear test track because their PIs are relatively similar to your sort of modern-ish hot hatches. So I want to see how these vehicles compare to modern hot hatches, say Fiat Bar 500s, Audi S1s and so on. We start with, well, where most modern muscle cars started, the Ford Mustang 1965 model. 271 horsepower, 2,562 pounds of weight. The Ford Mustang 65 handles interestingly. On paper, this is the lowest powered car. However, it is the lightest by quite a way, actually. And I had high hopes for the Mustang. I hoped that that lightweight would really help this car out, and it might be one of the quicker cars from the day. Unfortunately, this vehicle really needs a differential in it, because as you can see through there, all you get is smoke from one tyre. You'll hear this car redlining and actually bouncing off the limiter quite a bit. That's not because I forgot to change gear, that's just because when you go around a corner, the revs just rise and rise and rise in this car. And if you change gear, you basically go down to about 3,000 RPM. So yeah, if you hear it bouncing off the limiter, that isn't me being an idiot, that's me sort of, you know, trying to keep some speed up in this vehicle. Not my favourite car to drive around here, it has to be said. Although as far as some of the cars here today, the suspension travel is actually relatively decent, it isn't too wallowy. Straight line speed's okay, I guess. There are obviously faster cars here today, but it isn't too bad overall. If this thing had a diff in it, it would be pretty damn decent, but as it stands at the moment, not great. Next we have the Chevrolet Camaro SS, 375 horsepower, 3,527 pounds of weight. I will try and keep my personal bias against the Camaro out of this for this episode. Anyways, the Chevrolet Camaro SS begins what I would like to call the traditional muscle car handling. Pretty much all of the cars here today handled relatively similar. They're all pretty wallowy when it comes to the suspension, all of them have decent straight line speed, all of them feel very heavy, and all of them kind of want to oversteer. There are a couple of little kinks here and there, and some of them do handle slightly worse than the others, but as a general rule of thumb, all the cars here today basically handle pretty much the same. And the Camaro is probably the most average driving of all these cars. This is probably one of the better handling cars here today. As far as power goes, I believe it is the third least powerful car here today. 375 horsepower, everything else here is basically pushing more than 400. The weight is okay, I guess. It's a little bit less than average as far as this classic car is concerned. So yeah, I was kind of expecting this car to be roughly similar to the Mustang's time. This is a higher specification model than the Ford Mustang. If I bought the Boss 302 to this, I'm sure the Mustang and the Camaro would actually be pretty decent competitors, but as far as the base model Mustang versus the Camaro SS, we'll have to see on that one. Next up we have the Dodge Charger, 425 horsepower, 3,671 pounds of weight. This is the first of the Hemi powered muscle cars here today, and there is quite a few of them, so get used to 425 horsepower. The Dodge Charger, the 69 Charger, probably my favourite of the classic muscle cars. I'm not a huge fan of this class of vehicle, but the 69 Charger is certainly a car which I actually really like. I think it looks absolutely fantastic, it sounds great, and it goes relatively well. Again, all these muscle cars do handle relatively the same, and the Charger was relatively decent actually. These cars don't handle nowhere near as bad as you'd expect them to. Oh yeah, understeer, that's another thing, because of the way the suspension's set up. You can get understeer in these vehicles, and that was being a bit of a problem through Hammerhead there and through the follow through. Actually, you really have to brake and slow down in these vehicles for the follow through. I'm fairly certain none of these cars took the follow through flat out, other than maybe one exception which we'll get to. shortly, but the Charger was a pretty decent car to drive over. All breaking into the second to last corner. Most of these cars do go a little bit wide. Again, that's sort of the understeer and the relatively poor brakes on these vehicles. They are 60s cars. I'm assuming that most of them are running drum brakes, so yeah, they're not the best. AMC Rebel is next, 340 horsepower, 3,650 pounds of weight. This is the second least powerful car here today. 340 horsepower isn't a lot when you compare it to the rest of its muscle car brethren, and the weight is relatively average. So I wasn't really expecting much from the Rebel, and as you can see, it is quite wallowy. That's the word we'll use for the AMC Rebel. Not a terrible car to drive though. I wouldn't really class any of these cars, save for maybe one, as being a terrible to drive. But yeah, the Rebel was just your normal generic-y muscle car, I guess, breaking into Hammerhead. Yeah, you do have to brake relatively early in these muscle cars to just get it stopped, and as you can see, there's some understeer and there's some oversteer through Hammerhead there coming out of it. It looks relatively alright on the way out of it though. Which is a good thing, certainly. Through the follow-through, how's this one going to handle? Well, you can see the camera is leaning because it's attached to the front of the vehicle. This is probably one of the better cars through the follow-through. I didn't really go wide in this vehicle at all, and actually coming out of it, that was another issue I was having with some of these vehicles. When it was coming out of the follow-through, it had some issues. Massive understeer there around the second to last corner. I can't imagine that's conducive to a good lap time. However, round they're relatively decent and across the line. Next up, I don't know if this is technically a muscle car, but I'm classing it as one for the purposes of this video. This is the Chevrolet El Camino, 450 horsepower, 3,820 pounds of weight. The El Camino is probably the worst handling vehicle here today. It is the most powerful. 450 horsepower is the most powerful vehicle here today. But this is probably the worst one to drive. It has the worst suspension setup of any of these vehicles. You can see it just it's kind of high up, which is a bit of an issue. Also, the fact that there is no weight over the rear end of this vehicle. All the weight is in the front. That means the rear end can get quite loose. Nowhere near as bad as I expected it to. This vehicle wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. I've heard some true horror stories about driving El Caminos in racing situations, but luckily this one wasn't too bad stock. Yeah, I do quite like the El Camino. If we class this as a muscle car, this might be my favourite over the Charger, just because it's incredibly silly. You really had to ease off through the tyres, because otherwise it would just go wide onto the grass going around the second to last corner. That's a pretty decent line compared to most of the muscle cars here today. And through the last corner, a bit of tail sliding, but relatively clean. Next up we have the Dodge Dart Superstock, 425 horsepower, 3,020 pounds of weight. On paper, this should be the fastest car here today. It is the second lightest. It has the Hemi, so that means horsepower is pretty decent. And yeah, overall, I was expecting quite a bit of the Superstock Dart, and well, I'm pleased to report that this car was actually pretty decent to drive. It cornered relatively flat for muscle cars, and I didn't really have too many issues with the handling. The biggest problem with this car is probably the fact that it's only a 4-speed gearbox. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't having any issues with any ratios or anything. It's just the fact it's a 4-speed, which I don't particularly like. I would have preferred, you know, a 5-speed, but then again, these are muscle cars. That's the one thing I was expecting to be a bit of an issue today, is the fact that most of these cars come with 4-speed gearboxes, some even with 3. And I was expecting that to be a big issue when it came to these vehicles, but honestly it wasn't. The gearing is pretty decent. It's relatively long, as you'd expect, obviously because these cars are sort of built for drag times and so on, so the gearing is relatively long, but it isn't too bad. Most of them top up. I believe this one actually tops out at about 120 miles an hour, so yeah, not too bad. And our final car for today is the Plymouth Hemi 425 horsepower, 3,880 pounds of weight. That makes this the heaviest car here today. I wanted to try the Hemi It was a toss-up between this or the Dodge Challenger. I've chose the Hemi in the end just because it's from a different brand. It's from Plymouth, so that's why we've gone with this. Comes in a fantastic plum crazy colour as well. That's the one cool thing about these muscle cars, is the fact that they come in many interesting colours, and yeah, the Hemi probably comes in the most interesting of colours, because you can have this in hot pink and lime green and this purple and all sorts of different colours. The Cuda wasn't a particularly terrible car to drive. It was just an average muscle car, to be honest with you. Drove kind of similar to the Camaro in that respects, I guess. As I said, all these muscle cars drive pretty much the same. There's not really too much between them as far as the way they drive, but we'll have to see if there's any difference between them on the lap times. By the looks of it, the Hemi actually took the follow-through reasonably well there. Probably the best line we've seen through there all day. And yeah, by the looks of it coming out the tyres as well, it wasn't too bad. Second to last corner, braking early as you need to, and yeah, relatively well around there. Let's see how it does through the last corner. Yeah, that was probably one of the cleanest laps we've seen today. Anyways, onto the times, and the Dodge Dart Superstock was the fastest car of the day, going into 94th with a 127.774, which is pretty decent. Beats out an Audi S1, Ford Focus RS Mark 1, Renault Clio V6, pretty decent time. The Dodge Charger goes into 98th with a 128.494, beating a Cosworth Escort, which is pretty good. Onto the rest of them now. Plymouth Hemi 108, 129.890, beats an Abarth 500. AMC Rebel goes into 111th with a 130.700, beating out a Clio RS. The Chevrolet Camaro 131.191, Chevrolet El Camino 131.582. And the Ford Mustang 132.010. So they all go into a relatively similar sort of clump of times. We haven't really had many 131s around here, so that's why they're all kind of bunched together. The El Camino was looking like it was the slowest vehicle of the day. The handling let that one down, and the Mustang's differential issue also let that one down. Anyways, I want to thank you all very much for watching. Next week, not sure what we're going to be doing. If you've got any suggestions or anything, as always, leave them down in the comments below. But anyways, I want to thank you all very much for watching. My name's been the Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.